Welcome to Lesson 8 for Unit C4. My name is Daniel Andisi and I use OpenSciEd in my classroom. In Lesson 8, we will shift our focus from qualitative observations of ocean chemistry to the predictive mathematics of stoichiometry. Let's anchor where we've been in this unit's storyline up to this point. In Lesson 7, students spend time analyzing the needs of indigenous leaders and aquaculturists, establishing that human decisions are deeply intertwined with environmental chemistry. Mechanistically, they also lock down some fundamental chemistry, figuring out that a strong acid has a lower pH than a weak acid, and that adding product ions to a reversible system shifts the reaction based on Le Chatelier's principle. This realization cornered them into an authentic need for today's lesson. They know they can actively change the pH of acidic solution by adding a base, but they realize that guessing the amount could swing the system too far and trigger a secondary ecological catastrophe. Let's take a quick look at the structural design of this lesson. Lesson 8 is a 3-day, heavily hands-on investigation lesson which requires no device or screens for the students. The cognitive load stays entirely on physical materials and pure sense-making discussions. Logistically, you'll want to budget about 45 minutes of dedicated teacher preparation time to cut your balancing equation cards, set up the chemical weighing stations, and prep your physical modeling bags. Material preparation can be reduced in future years by saving the equation cards and possibly laminating them. I find it helpful to think of this lesson as a series of 3 distinct sense-making loops. In loop 1, the core concept we are targeting is that coefficients in a balanced equation represent particle ratios and not mass ratios. Students use physical cards to balance the neutralization reaction between sodium hydroxide and oxalic acid, finding that there's a clear 2-to-1 coefficient ratio. Naturally, human intuition takes over and they assume this means a 2-to-1 mass ratio. We let them carry out the investigation based on that assumption, weighing out 1 gram of acid and 2 grams of base. The reaction will fail spectacularly and turn the pH strip a dark, dangerous, basic purple. Loop 2 is all about bridging that gap by figuring out how we can count large numbers of particles by weighing them. We pull students out of the cognitive pit from day 1 failure by handing them a sealed bag of paper clips and asking them to find the exact count without opening the bag. They will realize that if they know the mass of a single clip, they can divide the total mass by that individual mass to get an accurate count. We then bring their attention to the periodic table, introducing the concept of a mole and molar mass. For loop 3, we finally use our new stoichiometric tools to calculate the exact mass of sodium hydroxide needed to neutralize our 1 gram of oxalic acid. If students do the math correctly, they find they only need about 0.89 grams of base, not the 2 grams they guessed in day 1. They head back to the lab stations, mix the precise amounts, and achieve a successful neutralization. By the end of our 3 sense-making loops, the class consensus should lock down these core ideas. First, balancing equations models the conservation of mass and provides us with the necessary mole ratios of reactants and products. Second, molar mass can be calculated directly using atomic masses from the periodic table. And third, both molar mass and mole ratios are required to convert back and forth between mass and moles of interacting substances. Now let's transition into our key instructional moments of this lesson. For our first key moment in part 5, let's look at a quick snapshot of your classroom. If you walked into the room at this point, you should see students at their lab stations wearing splash goggles, carefully weighing out 1 gram of oxalic acid and 2 grams of base, mixing them in a beaker and dipping a pH strip only to stare at it in complete confusion as it turns a dark purple. This moment is instructionally significant because that productive struggle is vital. Failing the mass ratio test creates an authentic, visceral need for the concept of a mole. What I watch for in student thinking is their initial frustration. A common sticking point is that their everyday intuition tells them that a 2-to-1 recipe means a 2-to-1 weight ratio. Feel free to lean into that confusion. Don't correct them, but instead ask, we followed your 2-to-1 ratio from the equation. So if mass didn't work, what must those coefficients actually represent? In part 11, pairs of students handle sealed clear plastic bags of paper clips and staples, performing quick division and then transitioning to look at the massive numbers on the periodic table. The moment's important because to our learning, it explicitly connects a tangible macroscopic activity to the abstract math of stoichiometry. I found students often treat unit conversion as a series of arbitrary robotic rules. What I watch for is whether they understand why units must cancel out in their equation. A common sticking point is freezing up when they see that massive number of 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. To help them, I like to use the dozen analogy to remind them that it's just a word that means a specific number of things. And I intentionally show them incorrect unit conversion setups on the board to emphasize how matching identical units diagonally allows them to cancel out cleanly. For our final key moment is part 14. Students complete their successful retest using the 0.89 grams at base, dip their pH strips for confirmation, and take note of slight variations during the class consensus discussion. This variance validates their mathematical model while reinforcing real-world physical chemistry and the stubborn properties of matter. What I watch for in student thinking is a tendency to panic. Students often think that if their beaker isn't a perfect 7.0, they did the math wrong, or the moles is a lie. Rather than just giving them the answer, I take this opportunity to step back and encourage them to puzzle through these unexpected results using the ideas they built back in lessons 6 and 7. I want them to look at their own reasoning and realize that they were successful and that they actually had the understanding necessary to make sense of why reality is messy, especially when dealing with a weak polyprotic acid like oxalic acid that holds onto its hydrogen ions tightly and doesn't dissociate completely at the same rate. This should all connect well to our discussions of strong and weak acids leading up to this moment. When we look at the navigation out of this lesson, our classroom shifts to a broader focus. We ask them, now that we calculate neutralization of the small beaker, how do we do it for the entire ocean? Let's talk about some practical classroom tested tips and tricks to help bring you success with lesson 8. Because sodium hydroxide is a strong base, please make sure to use full PPE, which includes goggles, gloves, and aprons, and strictly enforce those rules before anybody moves forward. One practical move that saved me a lot of headaches in setting up for this lab is having two completely separate weighing stations. One specifically for the sodium hydroxide and a separate one for the oxalic acid. Keeping those solids apart prevents cross-contamination, which can mess up their balance measurements or cause reactions to happen before you want them to. Also, if you've run into supply issues or you've experienced some challenges with oxalic acid in the past, you don't have to stick strictly to it. You can swap it out for other diprotic acid alternatives such as malic acid, tartaric acid, or succinic acid. The core stoichiometry and mole ratio concepts hold up exactly the same, so choose whichever option works best for you or your storeroom, but be sure to make the changes to molar masses obvious for the students before they do their calculations. When I teach lesson 8, I found that the physical form of our lab chemicals can throw a wrench in the students' stoichiometric calculations. If we aren't careful, oxalic acid typically arrives in our storeroom as a hydrate, meaning there are water molecules physically bound right inside the crystalline structure. If students just look up the standard anhydrous formula online or in a reference table, their calculated molar masses won't match the actual mass of the substance they're weighing out on their balances. To keep this from becoming a frustrating roadblock, I make sure to explicitly promote them to look at the exact chemical formula printed on the bottle we are using in class, and then remind them that looking at the label is important prior to doing their dimensional analysis. If we don't account for that bound water in their initial setup, they'll end up under measuring the base needed for the reaction, and their neutralization attempt will fail to reach the targeted pH. When it comes to the equation cards, I found this is your best tool for differentiation. For groups that are struggling or need extra processing support, I like to give them the full molecular formula cards so they can focus strictly on visualizing and balancing the intact molecules. For your groups that are ready for a challenge, give them the individual ion cards instead. This adds a rich layer of chemical logic because they can't even begin balancing the equation until they use the ions to balance the electrical charges and form formulas from scratch first. This is where value comes to homogeneous grouping and putting students together that you know you need to spend more time with in the classroom, and having groups where you feel like they're ready to move forward independently. To support our work from part 11 with the paperclips and the staples, I found that setting up stations where students directly handle and measure out amounts of a substance really helps ground their understanding. I use a mix of pure elements like copper and zinc and compounds like sodium chloride. I challenge them to show me what 1 mole looks like for each of them. And then I add to that and have them calculate and measure half a mole or 3 moles or 2.5 moles and have them visualize what that math feels like more than just having it on a number on a paper. I like them to see that different substances have different masses and different volumes, even when the number of particles is the same. One thing I like to do is save a lot of classroom headache by standardizing the calculations for the entire room at the beginning. Mandate that everyone rounds all their atomic masses to the hundredth place. Period. This removes the friction surrounding rounding rules so they can focus entirely on conceptual logic. I also spend extra time emphasizing that conversion factors like grams per mole are not scary new math procedures. They are just equivalent ratios that let us scale values up or down seamlessly. Finally, I try to include some mental math or approximation to my calculations. Having students think about if they have a mole, less than a mole, or more than a mole before they start doing the math can allow them to approximate what their answer should be. If they believe they should end with more than a mole of something, then they know their answer can't be a decimal, or they know that their answer, if it's measured in mass, has to be greater than the molar mass of that object. This lesson contains several words we earn and encounter. We co-construct and earn the definitions of molar mass and mole ratio, and we refine our definition of the mole to represent a specific quantity of 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd particles. We also encounter neutralization and stoichiometry. Thanks for taking the time to prepare for Lesson 8. In Lesson 9, we're going to take these exact stoichiometric tools out of the classroom beaker and apply them to calculating the massive tonnage of base required to protect an entire ocean bay. Good luck. You got this.